Good afternoon to you. Mark Sett of HurricaneTrack.com here. Hurricane Outlook and discussion time. It is Thursday, the 12th of August, 2021. And today we're going to talk about Fred, Tropical Depression Fred, and the uncertain future that lies ahead for that system. What you can at least try to expect if you are in Florida and elsewhere as we look ahead to what Fred's impacts might be. Also going to take a look, of course, at 95L out there. It's looking fairly well organized, but not everything is as it seems, and you're probably thinking, what does that mean? Well, these systems seem to be struggling a little bit, not that anybody's really complaining, right? And I think there's a reason for that. Part of it is climatology. We're still not quite to mid-August yet, and it really is important that climatology plays a big role here. The closer we get to the end of August, the more we would expect things to start to develop. So we're still just a few days shy of that mark, and it really does make a difference. And yet we still have these two systems out there. That's telling in and of itself. But also the Madden Julian oscillation, the phase that we are in currently. I've got some really cool graphics that I can show you from our good friend Webb to try to explain that. So the future of Fred is uncertain as we track Invest Area 95L. Basically the subjects, most of the subjects of today's update. So first of all, the broad infrared satellite view. Here's what's left of Fred, the low-level center right in here. I'll show you that in a minute on the visible satellite loop. This is 95L. More energy coming off of Africa eventually. So the Atlantic is definitely not lacking in energy out there. Tropical waves, the warm water, all that kind of stuff. But there are a few inhibiting factors, some mid-level dry air still present, a few what we call TUT lows, T-U-T-T, tropical upper tropospheric troughs, these little shear areas, because there's still a pretty good amount of rising air going on in the Pacific, keeping Kevin and Linda out there. Linda's now a hurricane. There's another system trying to develop. And we have to see this die down almost completely, lose all the rising air here so that it starts to rise more over the Atlantic. And that's part of the Madden Julian oscillation, and I'll show you these graphics as I alluded to earlier from Webb in just a moment. So let's zoom in and take a look at the latest here with Fred. It really got shredded pretty good here over Hispaniola yesterday. I'm sure there was some very heavy rain down there. Hopefully no loss of life or major damage from any of the mudslides and other rain-induced problems that I'm sure they had. So what's left of it? What's intact? Well, clearly a vigorous low-level swirl here just north of the eastern part of Cuba and parts of the central Bahamas. A few squalls coming through. Some interesting things to point out. And you can kind of tell that there's some dry air going on in here. Look at these thunderstorms that radiate out this way. There's some lightning in there that's detected and seen by those little yellow dots. But look at what's happening. These little curlicues that come out in front, little stringy things, those are called outflow boundaries, and that is the air rushing down and out. That's why it's called an outflow boundary. And that is not a sign of a strengthening system. With a tropical cyclone, the air needs to come into it from every angle as much as possible, not away from it at the lower levels. At the upper levels, yes, you need the wind to go out and the air to evacuate in a clockwise fashion pretty evenly. That is the evacuation of all that mass air that's being brought in at the surface. So when you see these little clues like outflow boundaries from thunderstorms, that tells you this isn't really doing so well in the strengthening department. There's still some mid-level dry air. Some of that dry air is getting injected in there. And what does that mean, dry air? Well, it's lower relative humidity values. Typically, you need to see values at least 60-70%, maybe higher, really to get these things juiced up. So there's some dry air down there, some shear going on, and Fred is currently struggling. But things can change quickly. 6, 12, 18, 36, 48 hours. Yeah, you bet. A lot of stuff can happen in a short amount of time, so we don't want to dismiss this, but I'm not too worried still that this is going to be a big impact for Cuba down here. Again, certainly some rain and some squalls through the Bahamas, Cuba, and eventually the Florida Keys, southern Florida, and elsewhere, but nothing that really jumps out at me still that makes me think this is going to be a really, really big problem, i.e. not very high wind, not a big storm surge problem. Impacts, yes, most of them on the low side, but it just depends. If it impacts you, maybe there's one thunderstorm one of those little thunderstorms could knock a tree over in your yard, or maybe your carport, if you have a detached carport that you put your car under, or whatever. You understand, maybe you have a business and a sign gets blown over and it costs you $2,500 or more to fix it. I can't predict exactly what's going to happen on an individual level, but on the broad scale, no, this does not look yet. It's still looking good that this will not be a big problem. So the vorticity signature for our depression, you can see it down here, fairly robust still, and you can see that clearly in the satellite animation. I believe this is Linda's vorticity signature. Let's use a color that stands out better. Nice and round down here, a compact hurricane. This is what's left of Kevin over here. And this is Invest Area 95L, a nice round area of energy that it's trying to bundle up as well. So again, lots of seedlings out there, lots of potential, but nothing really taking off just yet. And I think there's a reason, well, there's several reasons why, but we'll get into that more in just a moment. So a couple things that could boost Fred down the road. If the track comes in, let's use a color here, we'll use blue. If the track comes in like this, kind of like the Hurricane Center has been showing, anything generally along this area, and I'll just draw a couple of tracks just to kind of give us some options here, maybe more to the Florida Panhandle. Anywhere Fred tracks in the Eastern Gulf, the bottom line, those water temperatures, both at the surface and even the upper ocean heat content, where the warm water is below the surface as well, it's not just the skin of the ocean. We're talking 85, 86, 87 degrees. I mean, 31 Celsius, 87 Fahrenheit or higher. So plenty of very, very warm water. And I will say this, the farther west Fred tracks, let's just say that it happens to go over this way towards the western panhandle, Pensacola, maybe as far west as Gulf Shores. If that happens, there's definitely more room for this to strengthen later on. And it just makes sense. It has more time over this warm water and more time for the pattern to reverse itself and become more favorable. And I'll show you how that works in just a minute. So elsewhere, just wanted to show you this. I tweeted about it last night. Look at all of this energy over the continent of Africa, even late this afternoon, which is evening time over Africa. Deep convection. All of these impulses will eventually move out over the Atlantic. This is that rising motion that we expected to see over Africa, the favorable African monsoon, the wet Sahel region of Africa through here. And this is a telltale sign of a busy hurricane season ahead. And a reminder, it's still only August 12th. You know, just right there. See, August 12th. It's not quite the peak time of the season. Pretty much, climatologically speaking, and I emphasize again, it really does matter. Sometimes it's like literally flipping a switch from August 19th to the 20th, that things start to get really, really busy, because climatology does have a big role in this. That, you just go back and look at history, you get that big ramp up anytime after the 15th or the 20th. You start really throwing climatology into the mix as being a more favorable part of the overall environment. And all of these tropical waves over Africa, they will end up over the Atlantic, maybe the Eastern Pacific, but probably start to blossom in the Atlantic. And to that fact there, this tweet from Dr. Klotzbach today, NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, increasing their odds of La Nina for the peak time of the hurricane season up to about a 53% chance. And it doesn't, I mean, it matters, but I think the biggest thing that matters here is a 0% chance, basically. Now, they don't show that explicitly. There's always, a non-zero chance of El Nino, but come on, that would be one of the greatest faux pas in all of modern meteorological and oceanographic science if we got an El Nino. It's not happening. In fact, I would bet my entire career on it at this point. Mark is saying 0%. CPC, NOAA, they don't do that. They don't deal in absolutes. Usually it's probabilities. But really, no El Nino and the cooling Pacific headed towards La Nina, we're going to have a hurricane season that starts in earnest. You're going to really see a pickup here the last 2 weeks of August, and it's going to go through September, a couple of lulls, I'm sure, here and there. But October, I think, is going to be a very busy month again, just like we have seen going all the way back to 2016. Every October since 2016 and including 2016 has had a big hurricane threat in it for the United States, including Category 5 Michael in October of 2018. Just something to think about here. All right, so this is really neat. Eric Webb sent me these nice graphics. He tweeted this the other day. I asked him to send me the actual graphics that he did in his animation, and here they are. What does this mean? Well, essentially we're looking at the Madden Julian oscillation phases. We talk about that a lot. Phase 1, Phase 2, so forth and so on. And right now, let's just take a look. In fact, let's start here. This is the phase diagram for the GFS version of the Madden Julian oscillation forecast, and I'll highlight it in red here. This is where we are. We are in Phase 2, and it's fairly amplified, meaning that the Madden Julian oscillation, the farther out in the field that you go, the more amplified the upward motion is. It's a stronger signal overall. A weak Madden Julian oscillation would be real close to the circle here. A stronger one that gets amplified way out to the edges, and sometimes we've seen them go way out and even break the edges. Record-setting MJOs. Anyway, for today's discussion, we're here in Phase 2. That is shown on the GFS, and it is shown on the Euro as well. We are in Phase 2. It's hard to pick it out. There it is right there. So we're in Phase 2. No argument about that. Going back to Eric's diagram, when we are in Phase 2 of the MJO, which is right here, and that's where we are right now. You see those the lines come out. We're sitting in Phase 2. What does that mean? Well, we can go back and look. Tropical cyclone density, when you are in Phase 2, is usually favoring these areas. Where do we have Fred? In that area. And where do we have 95L? Out here where it's not quite as favorable. So these are very important clues. That's why 95L is not off to the races. The Madden Julian oscillation isn't quite favoring it yet. It's not very negative, but it certainly isn't getting a big boost from the MJO in Phase 2. So that's a big explanation as to why we are seeing what we are seeing. So this is one way to look at it, through the tropical cyclone density anomaly. This is what it looks like on the diagram chart. And this is what it looks like on a Mercator projection map, with the rising motion indicated in the green here, and the sinking motion, generally speaking, simplifying it for you, in the brown. All right, so let's move and look back at the diagrams. Going forward, the GEFS, the Ensemble Forecast System, over the next few days, indicating kind of a retrogression, but then forward moving through Phase 2, kind of de-amplifying at least the ensemble mean here, and I believe that's what the green is. You do have a lot of members that are much more aggressive for what it's worth, and then the overall envelope of all the members is this area. But generally speaking, it moves into eventually Phase 3 over the next several days. And the Euro also, I do believe, shows that as well. Moving out of Phase 2, kind of goes back towards Phase 1. It's weird, it retrogresses, which is odd. But then it heads towards Phase 3, de-amplifies, but some of the members are more amplified into Phase 3. You get the idea. Moving from Phase 2 to Phase 3. So what does Phase 3 look like? It's buried in here somewhere. I know it is. Hold on, I think it's at the end of the deck from my Gmail here. So Phase 3 is even more favorable in the western part of the Atlantic Basin, Central America, the Gulf, the Caribbean. Not so favorable here. So this leads me to believe that over the next few days, as 95L comes across, it's not going to have very favorable conditions. But the farther west that Fred goes the next few days, towards that panhandle, just on the edge of more favorable Phase 3. So again, it's like a razor's edge there. 95L, I'm not real convinced that it's going to do much if it stays north of the islands, but if it comes cruising through here, Phase 3 favors that. So you see, this is where all this kind of stuff matters. And the MJO itself starts to slide over, as you can see, into the Indian Ocean. And you say, well, how does that affect over here? That part I haven't figured out yet, except to think, I should have asked Eric more details, that once the MJO passes through, it leads to more favorable conditions in its wake, more moisture, less TUT activity, those little tropical upper tropospheric troughs, simplified, less shear. And it leaves this in a pretty large area, more favorable. So it passes through. It's kind of like Santa Claus visiting on Christmas, leaving gifts. That's the best way to put it. And the gifts to the Atlantic, or wherever the MJO is, once it's gone, the gifts that are left behind, less shear, more moisture, more convergence, and a favorable environment once the MJO has passed. And then as it passes over those various regions, sitting over Africa, the Indian Ocean, more rising motion gets started there. It moves on through. Those tropical waves come out, and the assembly line gets going. And then you see if the MJO comes back and sets up on top of those favorable conditions that it set off in time for everything to line up, and you get a very busy period. So it's all about lining everything up at the right time, having the tropical waves in the right phases to really get prolific development. Sometimes, as with anything, there are exceptions, and you can get development outside of these phases in a small pocket of favorability, but on the general sense, phase 3, quite favorable for these areas. So just real quick, what about the most favorable phase? Well, as these slides show, if this can go back for me, thank you. Phase 4, ironically, happens to be the most favorable for the Atlantic Basin, according to the data. The track density anomaly, phase 4, most of the deep tropical Atlantic and most of the Southwest Basin, Gulf of Mexico very much favored, even though you see the sinking motion generally favored in this area. It's more concentrated down over South America, less so in this area, and this is really cranking out the energy that seeds into this. So once the MJO gets into phase 4, history has shown that's when the Atlantic Basin typically really comes to life, and you get the threat of landfalls, and because everything's pretty much far to the west. I know it's complicated, hard to understand, but this at least gives you an idea of what the MJO is all about. And hopefully, I'll put the tweet that Eric put out about this in today's discussion description, and you can look at these diagrams as well. You can search for these on the web. I think it's like NOAA, INCEP, MJO phase diagrams or something like that. I can put the link to that as well. It's complicated, but these are tools that explain why things are the way they are now and what to look for in the future. And a lot of times the MJO can be a big help. Not every time. It's not the solution to everything, but it can be a big help going forward. So I think the big key here to summarize, especially with Fred, if it ends up farther to the west, it'll put it over warmer water. It'll take longer to do so, and it'll last longer so that we get into phase 3 of the MJO, which would favor potential development pretty quickly as it approaches the coast. So that's going to be a big key. So you see, instead of showing you models, right, let's take a look, open the window, see what's going on out there, and use other analytical tools and diagnostic tools and history as our guide. Makes sense? It works for me. I hope you understand. Maybe you can watch this a couple times, see if it makes sense to you. And look, you can follow Eric Webb on Twitter and, ask him, as they say, at him, hey, at Eric, what's up with the MJO? And he's pretty good at responding. He's a busy man. He works for the government out there in New Mexico, but he is one of these people that responds when he can, and that's how you learn stuff. All right? Have a great rest of your Thursday. As always, thanks for tuning in and hopefully learning something from me, even if it is pretty in-depth. I am Mark Suttoth, HurricaneTrack.com. We'll talk about it some more tomorrow.